Today I'd like to talk about high intensity interval training. Many people call it HIIT, many people just call it interval training. Technically it's high intensity interval training. And HIIT is actually used for improving your cardiovascular conditioning, increasing fat loss, and getting an efficient, quick workout in that still burns an effective amount of calories. One of the major mistakes that I see people making when they perform their intervals is the fact that they aren't actually tracking their heart rate. What they're doing is they're just going hard and they're assuming that they're reaching their peak targeted heart rate. And that's really a disadvantage to them. That's a mistake that they're making because they could be more efficient, they could be more effective if they really set out to reach a certain heart rate during their peak interval time and a certain heart rate during their rest period. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you how to figure out your heart rates for the peak period and for the recovery period. When it comes to heart rate, the first thing that you need to do is you need to figure out your theoretical max heart rate, and that's actually very simple. It's a simple one-step formula. All you do is you figure 220 minus your age. So for this example, I'm going to go with a 20-year-old person, and 220 minus 20 is going to be 200. So theoretically, that 20-year-old person has a maximum heart rate of 200 beats per minute. Now, your interval training heart rates are going to be percentages of that max heart rate of that 200 beats per minute. What I like to do for people is I like to start them out hitting 80 to 90% of that max heart rate during the first month or so of their interval training. I don't like to go 90 to 95% or higher until they're very accustomed to their interval training. It's a lot of stress on them at first. People get sick if you push them too hard, too fast, and that can scare people away, and I don't really want to do that. I want you to be comfortable with your opening workouts, get a break-in period, and then move forward once you feel strong enough to do so. So figuring 80 to 90% of that 200, we come up with 160 to 180 beats per minute. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but the next step is going to be to figure out the settings on the machine that you're using that actually get you into that 160 to 180 beats per minute range for the duration of your interval. As you can see, figuring out your heart rate for the interval period is really pretty simple. 220 minus your age for the first month or until you feel you're accustomed to your interval training, use 80 to 90% of that max heart rate. Now that takes care of the peak period, your interval period, but you also have that downtime in between your intervals where you're recovering, you're calming down, you're trying to breathe deep and catch your breath. You're dropping your heart rate down strictly so you're ready for that next interval, that next burst of max effort. Now, during that time period, you're trying to get down to around the 60 to 70% of your max heart rate range. For our 20-year-old individual, since their max heart rate is 200 beats per minute, 60% is going to be around 120 beats per minute. 70% is going to be 140 beats per minute. So essentially, once they get down to that 120 to 140 beats per minute range, they should be feeling ready to go. They should be breathing calmly. They should be mentally relaxed and basically just ready to blast out that next interval. So as far as figuring heart rate goes for your interval training, those are the two aspects that you need to get figured out. You need to figure out your interval target and your recovery period target. Now I've done that for a 20-year-old. You can fill in your own age into the formula 220 minus your age, and then to figure out percentages, if you want 60%, just times your max heart rate by 0.6. If you want 70%, times your max heart rate by 0.7, and so on and so on. Figuring percentages is simple, and that's how you do it. So you should be able to figure your max heart rate right now. You should be able to figure your 60 to 70% range, your 80 to 90% range, and then once you're comfortable with that 80 to 90% range, then it's possible to get up into the 90 to 100% range. I don't typically recommend going up to 100%, but it does happen. You know, intervals, you work real hard, you push yourself, you might get up into that range. I like to shoot for around 95%, to be honest with you. So, as an example, for our 20-year-old individual, 95% of that person's theoretical max heart rate is going to be 190 beats per minute. One thing you're going to find is that as you get older, your heart rates are going to drop as well. And that's just simply a function of the math. That's just a function of the formula. 220 minus 20 is 200 beats per minute. 220 minus 40 is 180 beats per minute. So as you get older, your heart rate is not going to be capable of raising as much, and that's fine because you're still pushing yourself to that 90 to 95% range regardless of the actual beats per minute. It's still tailored to you as an individual, and that's one thing that's important. That's important to realize because some people, they kind of get down about the fact that they're not able to push their heart as hard as the younger person next to them. But I always just tell them they are working just as hard as that person next to them, maybe harder. Heart rates are relative to you. As long as you're hitting your certain percentages, you're putting in the work, and that's something that you need to keep in mind as you get older and there's that younger person next to you. So what? Who cares? You could definitely be outworking them as long as you're doing things right and hitting that proper target heart rate range during your intervals. The next topic that I'm going to be talking about is interval duration. Now, what I mean by that is the actual duration of the time that you're going to be putting in that 100% max effort. The next topic that I'd like to cover is the duration of your intervals. Now, what I recommend is starting off with a very short burst, a very short interval of around 15 seconds. Now, 15 seconds is definitely enough time for you to get up to that max heart rate range as long as you push yourself. I see it day in and day out. 15 seconds is all it takes for people to really crank it out and get up to that 90 to 95% range. So you're not going to have a problem with that. If you're having a problem with it, it means that you're really not pushing yourself to the max. You're really not working hard enough for your heart rate to actually be required to beat in that 90 to 95% range. So that's something that you kind of have to work out with yourself. There's people that will come to me and they'll say that, I can't get my heart rate up to that proper range. And when I actually work with them, when I actually am next to them, helping them with their interval setup, they do get it up to that range. And they do admit that they weren't working hard enough on their own. That's pretty common. I see that a lot. So one thing is you have to ask yourself, if you're willing to work hard enough for true interval training, are you able to put in that 100% effort? And if you aren't, true interval training really isn't for you. But what I find is that even people that think that they can't put in the work and that they're not able to put in the work at first, they get comfortable with interval training, and within a matter of even 2 or 3 workouts, they're cranking their heart rate up to the right range. They're putting in the work that they need to be putting in, and they're more comfortable and confident with their interval training. So when you look at your interval training sheet, you're going to be writing 15 seconds in that gray portion, and that's just going to guide you and tell you that once you're rested and once your heart rate is back down to that 60 to 70% range, it's time to bump it up. It's time to increase that resistance and just hammer away for the next 15 seconds. So once you've got your sheet printed out, all those gray areas you want to write in 15 seconds, 15 seconds, 15 seconds. And that's going to be your starting point. 15 seconds is enough time for a quality interval to be done. It's definitely enough time to work hard. It's definitely enough time to get a feel and build up that confidence in case there's a time period where you want to bump up your intervals to 25 or 30 seconds. In order to finish up your interval setup, what you need to do is you need to figure out the actual resistance settings that you're going to use on your machine. So this requires you to actually get to the gym, and first off, you need to pick the machine that you like best. What I truly recommend is an elliptical machine, a rowing machine, a biking machine. I really don't recommend the treadmill solely for the reason that unless you're confident on the treadmill, you're going to have to run, you're going to have to sprint, it's going to have to be at an incline. And to be honest, there's a chance that you're going to fall off that machine. And you're not going to have that chance with the elliptical or the rower or the bike. All it takes really is one misstep on that treadmill and you're gone. So you don't really want to start on the treadmill. If you get comfortable on the treadmill sooner or later, that's fine, and that's really up to you. But my personal recommendation is to be on a machine that you can hold on to something with your hands and your feet never have to leave the platform that you're standing on. So elliptical, bike, or a rowing machine will work just fine. The reason that I like those machines is because you can actually increase your resistance on those machines and actually progress as far as your total workload through your interval workouts. Cardio is really no different than weight training in terms of progressing and increasing total workload and getting that progressive overload going. And you can do that by increasing your resistance on the machine that you're on from workout to workout or on a by-workout basis. So what you want to do when you get to the gym is, first off, you want to hop on the machine and you want to start warming up. So the first goal is that you want to find the settings that get you to around that 60 to 70% heart rate. So take 5-10 minutes. It's your first time doing this, so take 5-10 minutes, hop on the machine, start slow, check your heart rate. A lot of machines just have monitors that you can hang on to so you can constantly see your heart rate. One thing that's actually really common is for the machine that you're on to actually be able to wirelessly connect to an electronic heart rate band. So let's say you have a heart rate monitor, it's strapped around your chest. You should be able to look at the heart rate monitor on your cardio machine, and it should just tell you your number, whether or not you're holding on to the actual heart rate monitors on the machine or not. If you don't have that, just simply hang on to the heart rate monitors and you'll get a constant readout and you'll be able to find what settings work for that 60 to 70% heart rate range. So once you do that, you want to write those settings down on the very top of your sheet. You want to write them down on that very first slot. It's white, it says 5 minutes, and I'll show you that in a close-up too later. Now once you've been going for 5-10 minutes, you've got your warm-up in, you've been in that 60 to 70% range for long enough, and now it's time to figure out your resistance and your speed settings for an interval. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that on your machine you can see your RPMs or your strides per minute, your revolutions per minute, whatever the speed unit is on that machine. You want to be able to see that, and usually you're going to get a digital readout of that just by pushing a button and it'll show you. So on an elliptical, a typical rest period or recovery period or warm-up speed is going to be probably right around 80 to 100 strides per minute. Now, what you want to do when it comes time for the interval is you can start the resistance low, and when the time ticks to that 5-minute mark, you want to push as hard as you can, and you want to try to go as fast as you can for 15 seconds. So once you've done that, it's 100% effort. Once you've done that, you need to grab the heart rate monitors or look at the heart rate monitor if you have the wireless clip on, and you need to check your heart rate. Now what you're looking for is a heart rate that falls in between your desired percentage of your max heart rate. So assuming that you're just beginning, this is going to be in the 80 to 90% range. So for our 20-year-old, that was actually going to be 160 to 180 beats per minute. So let's say that they hit 150 beats per minute during that first 15-second interval. What that means is that they weren't working hard enough. Let's say they were going as fast as they could possibly go though, so what's next? What they have to do next is they have to increase the resistance so they can increase the amount of work that they're actually doing during the 15-second interval. So now they're going to go through their recovery period, and that's going to be that white section on your template. The rest period says as needed, and that's because you're actually going to find out how long it takes for you to recover and get down into that 60 to 70% max heart rate range. So drop back to your warm-up strides per minute. Your resistance should be low, as that really hasn't changed yet, and maintain it until you fall into that 60 to 70% range. Once you fall into it, hit your next 15-second interval, but this time you're going to use 1 or 2 increases on the resistance setting. So let's say you started at number 1, let's say that you hit 3 next time. So as the time approaches, you bump it up to 3. When it's time to go, you go as hard as you can for 15 seconds. As soon as you're done with that 15 seconds of 100% intensity, you want to check your heart rate. So you want to watch the screen, grab the heart rate monitors, or the machine is going to be connecting wirelessly, so you'll have a readout regardless. Now let's say you actually fall into that 80 to 90% range. So let's say this 20-year-old was at 170 beats per minute. So they're actually okay now. They figured out that their resistance is 3, and their strides per minute need to be whatever they were at. Let's say they were going 180 strides per minute. So now they know that resistance level 3 and 180 strides per minute will do the trick for their intervals for the time being. So now what you need to do is you need to actually go to the gym and you need to go through what I just talked about. You need to figure out that warm-up speed, that warm-up resistance that hits the 60 to 70% range. You need to hit an interval, adjust your resistance if need be to get up to that 80 to 90% heart rate range. And then also you need to figure out your recovery time. Usually that's between 2 to 4 minutes. And basically for the recovery time, it's however long it takes for your heart rate to go from peak interval rate back down to that 60 to 70% range. And like I said, that's typically 2 to 4 minutes. The more accustomed you get to interval training, the more your cardio conditioning improves, the lower that time is actually going to be. You want to be able to spike up your heart rate and bring it back down quickly. And interval training is really going to help out your cardiovascular conditioning and allow you to do that more efficiently. Once you've got those three different aspects of interval training figured out, you have your heart rates figured out, you have your resistance and speed settings figured out, and you have your interval duration figured out, you're essentially good to go. All you're going to do is you're just going to run through the template that I'm showing you. It's 7 intervals. You're going to take a brief 10-minute break after 4, and then if you have time after all 7 are completed, you're going to knock out another 10 minutes of low-intensity cardio at the end. So ideally, this particular template is going to take around 45 to 50 minutes, just depending on how in shape you are, because the longer it takes you to recover between intervals, the longer the total workout's going to last. So as you improve, your workouts are actually going to get more efficient and shorter. So feel good about your intervals, knowing that you're doing it right, knowing that you've figured your heart rates, that you've used the right heart rates, and that you're actually hitting those heart rates during your workouts. As we look at the template, you can see that we're starting at week 1, and we've got multiple stages to work through during the interval workout. The first stage is the 5-minute warm-up that I talked about, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and just fill in some things here, assuming that we're dealing with a 20-year-old individual. So for the 5-minute warm-up, we're shooting for the 120 to 140 beats per minute range. Let's just say that the individual was able to keep the machine at 1 resistance level and 90 strides per minute. Now that's the first step that they figured out when they actually went to the gym and got on their machine. They figured out that for the 5-minute warm-up to reach 120 to 140 beats per minute, they needed their machine at the first resistance level, and they needed to be going 90 strides per minute on, this is actually for the elliptical, so they were able to go 90 strides per minute. Now when they took that second step, they hit a 15-second interval. They needed to get their heart rate up into the 160 to 180 range, and to do that they had to use a 3 resistance at 180 strides per minute. So they wrote that in because their record keeping is important, and they're going to write that in because the next time that they go through this workout, they're actually going to try to increase that resistance and bump it up to a 4, because they're already going as fast as they can go. So in order for them to progress, they need to use the resistance level. Now what they did next is they took their recovery period and they figured that it lasted around 2 minutes. Okay, so I just like to write in the time there. So that's 2 minutes, and that got them back down into the 120 to 140 range. And those settings are going to be equal to that warm-up. So 1 resistance at 90 strides per minute. Now, as they go through their workout, they're going to go through and they're going to target the same settings. They're going to run it all the way down. During this 10-minute break period, after interval number 4, they're going to use those same settings, 1 resistance, 90 speed, and they're going to use that down here too. all the gray areas on the sheet should be filled in with 3 resistance, 180 strides per minute. That's their goal because they want to maintain that same resistance throughout the whole workout. If they can't maintain that same resistance, they're going to work at it until they can, and then they're going to raise up to that full resistance level. So the sheet is actually going to be full once they've completed their whole interval training workout. One thing that I'd like to mention is just down here, it says this can be done using any activity that will allow you to reach the targeted heart rate range. Aim to increase your settings from week to week. And that's just that progressive overload principle. You want to increase the workload when possible. So when you're able to get through the full workout with the same interval settings during each interval, it's time to move up a little bit. So as far as I can tell, you should be set up. You should be able to go to the gym and know exactly what you're doing. You should have your target heart rates in mind. You should know that you can just hop on a machine, know how to figure out your warm-up heart rate and settings, know how to figure out your interval training heart rate and settings, and then also know how to figure out your recovery period heart rate and settings. Once you've done that, it's just a matter of putting in the time and putting in the work and just knowing that you're using an effective method, increasing your workload from week to week, and basically just seeing results from that point on. If you have any questions or comments, ask me. I will answer them. You can always email me directly at ryan@growthstimulustraining.com, and I definitely will get back to my emails too. Leave comments, like the video. This workout will work for anybody that's interested in improving their cardiovascular conditioning, increasing their likelihood of fat loss, and increasing the efficiency of their time in the gym.